So we're going to discuss here presenting at a conference. And many of the issues about presenting are oral, having to do with how clear your voice is, or how loud your voice is, or how well you project your voice to the back of the room. But those are really focuses of another course. So here we're primarily going to look at the way you prepare a presentation for a conference. So when you prepare for a conference, some of the features are the same as you would prepare for writing a research paper. What is your audience like? Are there experts? Are there novices? Do they share your background? Do they understand what you're talking about? Are you presenting too much or too little? So all of these considerations you have to go through in terms of making your presentation. And so you need to spend a fair amount of time preparing a presentation, choosing the appropriate slides, and making the slides to be presentable and clear in terms of who your audience is. Remember, when you attend a conference, to bring your own technology. You never know what they have there, and so it's always better to have your own technology that you may be able to hook up. Bring the kinds of adapters you might need for your computer, whatever kinds of technology you have. If you have time before your presentation, it's always good to check out your room to see where you're going to stand and where your computer is going to be, and make sure everything works. Sometimes there are help desks at the conference that you can call on to help you, but you need to prepare in advance. And always have some backup. You just never know what's going to happen during a conference. We had one time when we presented at a conference, and the overhead projector didn't work, and we had to sit around with a small group and show them our laptop. So one of the decisions you have to make is which platform you're going to use. Clearly the oldest and most well-known and perhaps the most popular is PowerPoint. However, it's been criticized a great deal. There was a famous researcher named Edward Tufte who once said power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. Now, I don't know, I haven't really kept up on the design changes to PowerPoint, but his point is that your choice of platform is going to impact the nature of the talk and how you interact with your audience. So you need to be very careful about making these decisions. So often now you have a choice between Prezi and PowerPoint. So you may have noticed I use Prezi a lot in discussions and in these recordings and in classroom discussions. So I'm obviously like the way it's designed and the way it presents information, although frankly I'm not an expert at designing, and so you have to choose a platform that you feel more comfortable with and then work with it over a number of presentations so you can best exploit its affordances. So there's a number of features about a presentation you have to be cautious about. One is, of course, the size of the font and the color of the font and which font you use. So it has to be very big enough so that everyone in the room can see what you've put on the slide. And you may be very cautious about colors and to make sure that the colors don't clash and people are able to clearly read the slide. So this is something you need to check out before you make your presentation. So you'll see a number of people today that will be using more images on their slides. And the one thing about using images is it forces you to talk more extemporaneously because you can't read the slide, and that again changes your relationship with your audience. So images not only present an alternate way of representing information, but also can affect how you interact with your audience. So you always have to be cautious about the amount of text that you put on a slide. So you may not want the audience to have to read too much. So one alternative, and we'll show an example later, is to simply use a key word, or in this case, since it was the date of the first conference. That was what the most important thing. And again, that is a way of forcing you to interact more with your audience and talk extemporaneously about what the slide is about, what the content of the slide. So one of the first things you learn about PowerPoint is to avoid bullet points. And bullet points were something that was left over from the days when you may have cut and pasted text onto overhead projector slides. And when PowerPoint came out, that you found you can avoid using them. The other thing is to be cautious about separate slides. You don't have to jam everything onto one slide. Slides are free so that you can use as many of them as you need. So the fact that you can use as many slides as you need means that you can put a minimal amount of text on each slide, and that gives you a chance to use a greater number of images on your slides to replace the text. Regardless of which platform you use, you have to be conscious of the content, what content you're going to use. So a lot of times you may have been doing research, you may have even written a research paper, and now you want to give a presentation. So it's not like a paper. You don't need to go through every aspect of the paper in the presentation. You might want to focus on the problem being addressed, and maybe a minimal amount of lit review, focusing on the key articles in the field. One thing, if you want, you can present a bibliography. You can post that online later if people want to look at the literature review. The most important thing are what results that you've come up with and your conclusions about those results. So the point again is try to avoid giving a lit review. Keep the literature as short as possible. So nowadays you can share your presentations if you want to. Again, there are certain issues there along with privacy and intellectual property that you need to be aware of. But if you want to share it, there are sites like slideshare.com which allow you to post your presentation online, so that if people want to see it later, or they want to look at it again, or they didn't bother to come to your presentation, they could access your presentation online. As was mentioned last time, there are alternate formats even in presentations. But even if you have a traditional presentation, there could be different kinds of formats. And one that you see a lot used in Silicon Valley are questions and answers. So two people will sit on the stage, one of them asks the other one a question, and they provide an answer. This is supposedly more interactive and supposed to engage the audience in different ways. So I'm going to look briefly at this an example of a presentation that uses a lot of different images and alternative forms. And the presenter here is Larry Lessig, who's an expert on intellectual property law.
Think about what's developing in contests like YouTube. So here's a video I came across on YouTube. 1.7 million people saw this video. It then inspired this video. Of course, about 3.2 million people watched this video. And there were at least 10 others that I found doing exactly the same thing. Or anybody knows this extraordinary
call the soldier boy. You gotta punch, then crank back 3 times from left to right.
So this video inspired this one.
Soldier boy, what's up? Hey, I got the new dance for y'all called the soldier boy. You gotta punch, then crank back 3 times from left to right.
Inspired this one.
Soldier boy, what's up? Hey, I got the new dance for y'all called the soldier boy. You gotta punch, then crank back 3 times from left to right.
So the point is, these are conversations that's happening in this phase. It's the modern equivalent of what Sousa spoke of when he spoke of the young people together singing the songs of the day or the old songs, but not on the corner in the back lawns, but in the presence of this platform that invites people from around the world to participate.
So you can see in this video that he mixes images and texts and videos in a way that he's trying to show the new approach to intellectual property, but also a different approach to creating a PowerPoint presentation. So as we discussed before, there are a number of alternative ways of presenting in groups, individually, in forums, but one of the most common ones that a lot of you are using are posters. And posters are valued differently in different disciplines. In my discipline, they're not particularly valued very much, although they're trying to change that in terms of organizers of conference are trying to give more importance to posters. The format of a poster can be whatever. Again, you need to see this at a conference. What kind of format do they use? Some posters have small research papers that may interact between text and the data presentation. Some may be all images, some may be, I've seen them, they're all text. So there's no one way of your main concern is getting the information about your research out there so that people will come up to you and interact with you. They ask you questions, they make comments. So it can be in many ways a better way of getting feedback on your research than even a typical presentation. So again, if you have any questions about presentations, please let me know. Thank you.